Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be answering a question which I get a lot in my Discord server, and that is going to be, what do you think of Kafka? Why is she not on any DPS rankings or tier lists, and why are people not really talking about her as much? And the reason for that is that, she wasn't actually testable in closed beta 3, and her numbers here are, based on the tutorial or closed beta 2 generally, online. When you look her up, those are kind of the numbers that you're going to be seeing, meaning that they're probably not entirely accurate, and no one's really got a chance to play with her recently. So overall, that's going to mean that she's a very unknown unit. No one really knows exactly how her abilities work or the interactions or anything like that. So when you're thinking about Kafka, it's going to be a little bit of a Pandora's box. You're not really sure what you're going to get. So why are you making this video then if we don't really have solid information? You can't really chuck her in a spreadsheet. You don't really know how much damage she's going to deal. Well, a lot of people are hell-bent on Kafka, and I think that it's a reasonable discussion point to have. Should you save for Kafka? If you are dead set on it, you want to guarantee the pull, and you were like, well, what if she comes out right after Jing 1? Well, then in that case, you would have had to have the foresight to skip Zele and skip Jing to get Kafka on the third banner. Now, do I think she's going to come out on the third banner? I have no idea, but it could happen. And in that case, people probably who are really excited about Kafka would maybe appreciate a little bit information about her kit and whether or not she's shaping up to be a strong unit or just kind of like a medium unit who's not a kind of anything crazy. So what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to give you guys my opinion on the mechanics of her abilities as well as how her kit currently functions, and I'm going to try and give you a bit of detail. And maybe if you're a massive Kafka fan or you're just kind of genuinely interested in it, you might find this entertaining, or you might be armed with a tiny fraction of a little bit of knowledge, a little bit more, to kind of understand whether or not you want to save for her and skip the 2 banners that we have at the start. All right, so again, none of these numbers, I don't imagine any of these are going to stay the same. Massive changes were made from closed beta 2 to closed beta 3, and then we also have release to consider. What I do think might stay the same, though, is her mechanics. I do think that she probably will stay the same, as she is present in the tutorial, as well as, being in the game quite, focused, as a character. I think that her kit will probably be remaining pretty similar. Now, let's get into Kafka and we'll talk a little bit about her. So from my perspective, again, a reminder, this is all an opinion at this point, no numbers. We can see that she probably has 2 different ways that you can build her. She will be a main damage character. I don't think she's going to be played as a support or a neutral unit. I think she will be played as a main damage. She is going to have 2 ways that you can build her, and that is probably going to be crit as well as pure damage over time scaling. Now, I'm not entirely sure which one is going to be better. I'm going to discuss both of them here, but essentially, if you're looking into the damage over time build, it's essentially going to be her skill as well as ultimate that you're going to be focusing on here. If you're building the crit version, you're going to be focusing primarily on her talent. So we're going to be talking about both of those variants. Let's get into it. So first and foremost, I think the most defining factor of Kafka is her ultimate cost being 100 energy, as well as her talent giving her energy. So her talent states that after an ally uses a basic attack on a shocked enemy, that is important, Kafka immediately launches a follow-up attack dealing 150% of her attack to the enemy. It can only be triggered once per turn though. So essentially what this is essentially going to do is going to give you a massive unconditional nuke every single turn. Of course, apart from the shock thing there. So if you basic attack, you will get this extra nuke. If you skill, you'll get this extra nuke. Regardless of which one you use, you're going to get it. Every action you take will reset the cooldown on this talent and re-enable it for your team. And it's essentially always going to be activated every single turn. All you have to do is use one of your supports to attack a shocked enemy, which there should be plenty of with Kafka on the field, to kind of trigger that. So she's essentially going to get that talent every single time. Now, as all characters in Star Rail, use their abilities, they're going to get energy. The cool thing about talent and follow-up attacks, though, is that they generate energy as well. And generally, abilities like this, of this nature, like Himiko's and, Marches, they generate 10 energy on activation. So this one here, Gentle But Cruel, should generate 10 energy on activation for Kafka. Now, this is very important because units with this effect have massively different rotations than units without it. If you take a unit like Yang Qing, he also has a follow-up attack which generates 10 energy, and these follow-up attacks could also trigger on-head effects. So when you're thinking about like Ting Yang, the Blessing, that'll trigger that, and it's incredibly powerful and a massive scaling potential in terms of all team compositions, which is really great. Now, why is this so important? Why are you hounding on this so much? Well, her energy cost is 100, and a basic attack generates 20, and a skill generates 30. So if you were to use her normal rotation, without anything considered, you'd need to use 5 basic attacks to activate an ultimate, which would be, you know, pretty normal. That's standard. But with Kafka's talent in there, you're going to need to only use 4 because it would be 30 now every single basic instead of 20, which means, you know, you're saving a turn there. So already the talent is paying dividends. Now with the skill, it's particularly noticeable because you get 30 normally, so it would be 3 which you need. You know, it would be 30, 30, 30. Actually, it's 4, so you would need 4 of them. But with the talent, it would be 40, 40, 40, so 120. And you actually overcap. So you go from having a 4-turn rotation to a 3-turn rotation just because of this talent, which means the ultimate is going to be activated far, far more frequently, which is very, very strong. Okay, so we'll get into that more when we talk a little bit about some very broken stuff, which I can see on Kafka. But, you know, right now, this is a very strong effect, and I think it's the primary defining factor of Kafka. Now, let's talk about that shock, though, because she does need to attack a shocked enemy or have someone attack a shocked enemy in order to trigger that. Well, her technique actually just does shock an enemy on entry, and you're going to have to be pretty much using this as your technique, your active technique of the battle, because if you do not have a shocked enemy at the very start of the battle, Kafka is basically going to stall out, and she's not going to be as strong as she otherwise would be. So she is going to take up your you know, kind of active technique slot there. But, you know, overall that's going to be just fine. I think it's a pretty okay technique, and, you know, getting a shock early is going to be able to enable her and really turn her on. Okay, so perfect. Now that we understand all the conditions, you know, we're pretty good to go. Now she's also going to be able to get a permanent shock pretty much with her rotation, so that is also not a concern. Let's move on to her skill. So her skill, Caressing Moonlight here, is pretty powerful. It's going to deal 140% of her damage to the primary target, as well as 50% cleaved to adjacent enemies. Now, this is a low damage multiplier. If you compare it to someone like Ireland, who has over 300% on his skill, you know, it's quite low. But when you factor in her talent, you're going to get that every single time. It is actually suddenly quite competitive. It goes up to 290 of her base damage here with the talent factored in. So that is quite a respectable amount of damage there. That is, yeah, it's pretty up there, man. It's pretty up there. It's comparable to someone like Dan Heng. I think I actually might exceed Dan Heng's, you know, and it is very strong. It's higher than Sele's, so she is pretty competitive already in terms of her base damage numbers. All right, now it's obviously a cleave as well, so she's going to be a pretty effective lightning breaker. Do not underestimate cleave. It is very, very strong for breaking enemies and dealing with high priority targets. Okay, so that's very fantastic. But then on top of that, it also just has another effect, which is pretty damn strong in my opinion. You can see here, it was going to trigger all DOTs and trigger the damage immediately when you use the skill. So if there's a shock on there, if there's a wind shear, if there's a burn, it will trigger that burn and deal its damage immediately at 1.25 times of the damage. So essentially you can accelerate dot damage, and, you know, you can deal quite a lot of additional kind of juice there, which is pretty strong. Now, how strong is this truly though? Well, this is where the differentiation between two builds comes in. You can either build Kafka crit, or you can build her damage over time scaling. So when you build her damage over time scaling, you are going to neglect crit due to the fact that you do not want to crit, as you cannot crit with dots. So you're wasting your substats there, you're wasting your main stats there. You'd be much better off building pure attack. But it's worth noting here that Kafka's skill here doesn't really care about any sort of multipliers on her when she is triggering other characters' dots. So let's say you were pairing her with Sampo. It just says here that it's going to deal damage equal to 125% of the damage on there. So you could build Sampo as a pure dot machine, have all the wind shears on there, and you could build Kafka pure crit, and you would still get all of the benefits of Kafka's skill at triggering the wind shears. You wouldn't get the benefit of building her shock, but you'd be getting the wind shear benefit while also having Kafka as a crit character and taking advantage of her talent, as well as her high base values a lot more. So overall, there is a lot of flexible ways that you can build her, a lot of different things that you can do, but I think that her skill here, while a lot of people like to emphasize it, is, you know, very cool and very flexible in terms of what teams you can bring and what kind of things you can do, but I don't think it's necessarily the defining factor. I actually believe her high base values here are actually her defining value, and also her ability to recharge that ultimate as fast as possible here is going to be really the most important thing. There are very few units in the game who have a three-turn rotation in terms of their ultimate, so that is a very valuable thing to have. She also hits way more frequently to activate those on-hit effects, like Ting Young's Blessing, as well as other things. So that is probably where I'm going to see most of her value. All right, let's move on to her ultimate here, as we do kind of understand her Kafka's skill now. You know, high base damage, triggering dots, including her own, so you can trigger her own, you can trigger Sampo's, anything you want. Let's do her ultimate now. So it says that her ultimate is going to deal lightning damage equal to 60% of her attack to all enemies, with a 100% base chance for enemies to be shocked, and this lasts for 3 turns. So basically what all you need to understand here is that she's going to get her ultimate up very, very quickly within 3 actions, which, you know, that's plenty. You're basically going to have 100% shock uptime with Kafka, which is the main thing, meaning her talent is going to trigger all the time. Basically, there's not going to be ever a time when you're not going to be. At the start of the fight, you're going to get the technique, and then during the fight, it's going to be permanently shocked with her ultimate. So pretty good there. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit more about this secondary effect here though. So it says it's going to shock everyone, which is great, but then it also says immediately take damage equal to 100% of the original damage received. So that's kind of confusing. Even just reading that is kind of confusing, and it doesn't actually do what it sounds like it does. It almost sounds like it hits with the initial hit again, but that's definitely not what it does. What it essentially does by analyzing footage, and obviously this could be changed, is it actually triggers the shock which you apply straight away. So that shock which you just applied, you will straight away trigger it. And the reason we know that is by taking a look at her Eidolon here. Her Eidolon 4 states that after Kafka uses her ultimate, instead of immediately receiving damage from the shock state, enemies will now instead receive damage from all currently applied sources. So that gives us a little bit more of context there. So she's essentially going to apply a shock and then trigger it straight away. Now again, shock cannot crit, so that is definitely going to be a bit of a split focus here for Kafka. Do you build her crit? Do you build her damage? I'm not sure which one's going to be better. We're going to have to see and figure that out. Overall though, she's got a pretty high multiplier kit. There's a lot of damage flying around here. A lot of big numbers. So I do expect to see her being pretty good in terms of the damage if you actually did simulate her. If we take a look at her base stats as well, she's certainly no slouch in terms of speed, and she's got a reasonable attack. To give you guys a bit of a comparison, most 4-star units have anywhere between 550 to 620 attack. She's got 679. I think that's actually a pretty high base attack stat there. If you take a look at maybe someone who's got a really high stat here, whereas you like Yang Qing, I'm pretty sure he's got a pretty high base attack stat. 679. Yeah, so she's got a real high base attack stat right now. That's pretty impressive. So with her high multipliers as well as that high base attack and decent speed, I can see her being pretty competitive so far already. But that's not where we're going to stop talking about her though. Okay, so we're going to continue here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Kafka. We obviously understand now her kit. We've got the shocks going on, which are going to be ticking away. It's worth noting that shocks aren't actually a massive damage, contributor, unless you're really stacking up massive amounts of, damage over time with stuff like wind shear stacks or anything like that. It's not going to do crazy amounts of damage. And a good way to actually see how this actually ends up playing out is by taking a look at Serval. You can see that Serval, her damage isn't really that much from shock. It's mostly from her skill, ultimate, and talent. So when you're actually assessing Kafka, you don't really want to look too much at the shock. Yes, she can trigger the shock quite frequently using her skill as well as her ultimate, and you may want to consider building into the shock because of that, but I have a suspicion that you're going to want to build her crit. That's just my opinion because the numbers on her are just so high. Now the ultimate obviously doesn't have high numbers, but it is what it is. It's probably going to do some pretty good break damage, but at the end of the day, I really do think the thing that makes Kafka tick is going to be her talent as well as her skill, at least based on what we've currently seen and what we've got so far. All right, but we're not done here. Let's talk a little bit about her Eidolons, because some characters don't need them. Some characters feel complete without them, but Kafka doesn't feel complete without them, unfortunately. She definitely feels like a character that wants to have her Eidolon too. I'm not going to talk about the other Eidolons too much because, that's Omega Whale territory here. But I'm going to talk about Kafka's Eidolon too because, if you are a diehard Kafka fan and you must have her and you really like her, her Eidolon 2 probably is the stopping point, and it is the point where she becomes a good unit to an insane unit. Most likely, wait for the calculations, wait for the simulations before you actually do go ahead and quote this, but it does seem like that Kafka's talent 2 will be the breakpoint in turning her into an insane unit. So if you take a look at a unit like Sele, her insane breakpoint is Eidolon 1 and Eidolon 6. Kafka's is Eidolon 2. This is kind of like what you're going to be looking at wanting to get if you do really want to heavily invest in it. All right, so why is Eidolon 2 so insane? Well, it essentially allows her talent to trigger twice. So we've already talked about how her stats are so good and how her base values are so good. Well, now she just gets to trigger that talent twice, which is basically going to allow you to trigger all of the on-hit effects like Ting Yang's Blessing. Again, can't overstate that. It's going to be pretty strong with Kafka twice, as well as on top of the skill, so 3 times per turn. That's crazy. That is absolutely out of control. And overall, it's also going to allow you to trigger this number just straight up twice as well. So we were talking before about having a 290 damage multiplier on the skill here. Well, that would go up to a 440 damage multiplier. Okay, man, that's basically most characters' ultimates every single turn, and then you get the damage over time stuff on top of that as well, and to cleave. Jeez Louise, and this is also going to be doing break damage to the toughness bar as well. We're talking some pretty serious chunky numbers here, man. Now, the thing where it's really, really crazy though is that it actually alters her rotation as well. Now, keep in mind, we obviously don't know this for a fact, but taking what we do know about the game, this is going to drink 10 energy. Okay, so if we got our 30 here, so 30 plus 10 plus 10, that's 50. So 50 plus 50 equals 100. That means that she's going to be able to use her ultimate every 2 actions, which would give her the shortest rotation of any damage dealing character in the game currently, which we know, which is very, very enticing to say the least. So she's going to be doing 3 instances of break damage and then also an ultimate more often than anyone, and the ultimate is AoE. So she's honestly shaping up to be a very, very insane lightning breaker, and I do think that she definitely has quite a lot of very, very interesting things going on in her kit. She's got insane base numbers, and she's also got this DOT scaling going on. There's lots of things that you can do with her, and I definitely do think that there is quite a lot of potential on this character to kind of explore. Now, if you actually take a look at her traces here, she also does have a bit of a sweeping potential here. If you do defeat shocked enemies, she also gets energy, which is kind of nice, although her ultimate is, not very high value, and also you're going to be getting it a lot anyway, but, nonetheless, it's pretty nice. In addition to that, she also does take 20% less damage just straight up from all enemies that are shocked, which everyone will be, unless they are immune to shock or they're resistant to shock. So, that's pretty nice as well, just taking less damage. That's definitely nothing to scoff at there. Overall, I guess we could touch on her Eidolon 4 here. This is obviously pretty expensive to get, but, this is essentially going to double down on her DOT scaling, and this can be another break point, another stopping point, but it's nowhere near as strong as her Eidolon 2. This is literally character defining. This is just basically going to make her better in dot teams. It's basically, instead of going to be just triggering her shock on the ultimate, it's going to trigger all the damage over time effects on her ultimate. So if you have like Sampo there, it'll trigger the wind shear as well, which definitely adds more value to her ultimate and probably will juice up her damage quite a lot. But it's definitely not a must have or anything like that. So overall, Kafka, is it worth to save for her? Well, I really couldn't say. Is she competitive with Jing1? I'm not sure. I haven't done the numbers on it. But she definitely does seem like she has a lot going for her, and she does seem like a very strong unit, especially with the Eidolon 2. She definitely does seem like an exceptionally high break unit kind of character. She can break a character probably entirely on her own from 0 if it's vulnerable to lightning, and that does seem pretty enticing. Now, some things in her, kind of against her is that, she is a lightning unit. You get a lot of lightning units for free. There's Ireland, there's Serval, and, if you pulled for Jing, you'd have Jing as well. And, do you really need another lightning unit? Maybe not, perhaps not. But at the end of the day, is Kafka going to be one for you? Well, it's probably going to be just based on whether or not you like her or not, because at the end of the day, the game doesn't look like it's going to demand you to have the most insane teams, the most min-max teams. Does she look like she's going to be good? Absolutely. She definitely looks like she's going to be very good, actually, especially with Eidolon 2, but the truth will be revealed in time when we see the final balance of her, as well as see the final numbers on her and how she scales with different team comps and all sorts of stuff like that. Hope you guys have enjoyed this bit of a sneak preview of Kafka. If you would like to see Blade, as well as Lugoka, as well as Silverwolf, let me know. I can do a little bit of a thoughts on that, as these are the current units which I haven't covered. But until then, hope you guys have enjoyed. If you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe. Until next time, cheers.